In 2018, David Trons was fascinated with substantial repairs to the Orlando, Florida home he shared with his wife, Chanti Cooper Trons, and Chanti's son, Jackson. The house was stunning, a 4,000 square foot property with a pool and a garage apartment, making it quite the ideal home. However, the upstairs rooms were somewhat small, and the layout didn't suit every family. It made sense why someone might want to renovate it. The contractor described to the police how he first met Chanti and David while renovating the residence. Dave contacted him unexpectedly and invited him to visit the project. He indicated they had done some work, but he was not prepared for what he saw. He said, when he arrived, the house was almost completely deconstructed and open like a large shoebox. He described it as frightening and unlike anything he had ever seen. For Dave Tronis, this house became more than just a project. It consumed him. It became his life, and unfortunately, it was central to a tragic event that led to Chanti's death. The case began with a 911 call on April 24, 2018, at around 3:51 p.m. Dave claimed to have come home and found Chanti floating in the bathtub, unresponsive. But his story didn't add up. Chanti had been brutally beaten. It's heartbreaking, especially for her family and her young son, that her life was taken. Right from the start, Dave was a suspect. He voluntarily went to the police station, where he spent hours without requesting a lawyer. He even agreed to provide DNA samples and undergo a personal search. Throughout the interrogation, Dave maintained that he was deeply in love and happy, but as detectives pressed him, the tension escalated. They accused him of murder, but Dave never broke under the pressure. He never confessed. The detectives seemed convinced from the start that Dave was guilty, and they pushed to build a case against him. They even questioned whether the house, which had become such an obsession for Dave, might have been a factor in Chanti's death. Could she have still been alive if it weren't for this house? It's possible. Delaney Park, the neighborhood where the house stood, was a historic, family-friendly area. Tara Stevens, a realtor familiar with the community, described it as a great place to raise a family, with plenty of outdoor activities and good schools. She had sold the house to Dave, noting how happy he and Chanti seemed at the time. Yet, after the contract was signed, she noticed a change in Dave's personality. As investigators looked into Chanti's background, they learned she was a dedicated mother to her 8-year-old son, Jackson, whom she shared custody of with her ex-husband. Chanti had met Dave online, and they quickly hit it off, exchanging emails that revealed how smitten she was with him. Dave, fresh out of a long marriage, soon moved to Orlando and fell in love with the house in Delaney Park. He paid for it in cash and placed it in a trust for himself and his mother. But as time passed, it became clear that this house, which was supposed to be a dream home, was instead the setting for a terrible tragedy. I saw a completely different side of Dave, like a stubborn child who wouldn't stop until he got his way. When the deal was finally done, I was relieved. I just didn't have a good feeling about him. Cindy and Dan, who were Chanti's relatives by marriage, initially didn't like Dave either. But over time, Cindy's feelings changed. I loved her, so I grew to love him, Cindy said. They adored Dave after getting to know him. On their first lunch together, Dave charmed them by walking in and saying, "How lucky am I to have lunch with two of the most beautiful women I know." In 2015, Dave and Chanti moved into their new home and began renovations, with Chanti footing the bill. As for what Dave did all day, he claimed he worked on the house, handled the renovations, and maintained the property, including cleaning the pool. Contractors came and went, but by 2018, the house was still unlivable. Chanti was relegated to working and sleeping in the small apartment above the garage, while Dave often slept downstairs with the dogs. Desperate to fix the house, Dave reached out to Keith Ory, a local renovator and TV personality from Zombie House Flipping, a show where homes in terrible condition are restored. When Keith inspected the house, he found it in such bad shape that it was astonishing. The only thing holding up the structure was 2 inches of stucco. The house was essentially a 2-story shell, and although tempted to walk away, Keith decided to take on the challenge. Keith began shoring up the interior, and plans were made to feature the house on an upcoming season of Zombie House Flipping. Filming was set to start in May 2018, but there was tension between Dave and Chanti. In their last meeting with Keith, Chanti quickly left, appearing upset with Dave. According to Ryan Vesio, the prosecutor, Chanti had been trying for years to get her name on the trust that owned the house, but Dave never followed through. This unresolved tension came to a head just days before Chanti's murder. She had spent a lot of money, about $250,000, on a house that wasn't even in her name, and she was living in an unstable, unfinished home. After Chanti's death, Dave went to the Orlando police headquarters without a lawyer and stayed there for 14 hours. He cooperated fully, giving law enforcement access to whatever they needed. His attorney, Richard Seski, emphasized that Dave had nothing to hide, and that's why he sat down with detectives for so long. At first, detectives Teresa Sprague and Barb Sharp seemed sympathetic, letting Dave talk without interrupting much. Dave stuck to his story. He had taken the dogs to the park in the afternoon and returned to find Chanti floating in the tub, still in her pajamas. He claimed he tried to perform CPR, but couldn't save her. However, as the interrogation progressed, the detectives began to pick apart his story, questioning the injuries on Chanti's face, including a bloody cheek and bruised eye. Dave's explanation that she had slipped in the tub didn't match the severity of her injuries. The detectives also noted blood on Chanti's bed and suspected that she had been killed there. Dave, however, insisted the blood was from her menstrual cycle, but the amount and location of the blood raised doubts, leading the detectives to dig deeper into the possibility that this was no accident. Detectives suspected, and Chanti's autopsy later confirmed, that she had been strangled. However, Dave Tronas's attorney, Richard Selesky, maintained that Dave couldn't explain Chanti's injuries, not because he was lying, but because he genuinely didn't know what had happened. He took his best guess based on what he found, Selesky said. He doesn't know what happened, and that's the point. The detectives, determined to break through, pressed Dave for hours, taking turns to ask increasingly tough questions. "Did you two argue?" they asked. "No, absolutely not," Dave replied. "Did you fight?" Again, he insisted. "Absolutely not." The most pointed question came next. "Did you harm Chanti in any way?" Dave's answer was firm. "Absolutely not." Detectives Teresa Sprague and Barb Sharp also focused on Dave's timeline. He claimed he had called 911 about 5 minutes after discovering Chanti, but the detectives were skeptical. "You've got to help us understand," they urged. They pointed out that the evidence didn't align with his story. There were no signs of water splashing in the bathroom, the tub was completely dry, and Chanti's body was damp, not wet. "You've got to help us. Can you do that?" the detectives asked again. Dave insisted. "I'm telling you everything." From their observations, detectives began to draw their own conclusions. They zeroed in on possible motives. Did she catch you with another woman? Did she have a boyfriend? Was it about the house? They asked. But Dave denied all of it. Still, the state of the house, left unfinished after years of renovations, made the detectives wonder if that stress had something to do with Chanti's death. "I'm sick to death about what happened," Dave said. "But nothing happened today because of any animosity between us." Dave also rejected the idea that Chanti had been upset over not having her name on the house's trust. "We talked about it and debated it, but we finally just said it doesn't really matter. Let's move forward." The detectives were relentless. Both Sprague and Sharp were skilled interrogators, alternating between manipulation and empathy. At one point, Sharp even placed her hand on Dave's knee, speaking in a softer tone. "We'll be okay. We can't help you until you help us." But moments later, Sprague would switch to a more aggressive approach, questioning Dave's role in the household. "She treats you like the landscaper, like the pool boy, probably because she's bringing in the money." As the hours passed, the detectives tried every tactic they could to get Dave to confess. "What do you want your mom to think about you?" they asked. "Are you religious? Want to pray?" It was clear the interrogation had turned into psychological warfare. Dave started the interview by saying how happy he had been with Chanti, but after nearly 8 hours, the detectives weren't convinced. "You claim to love that woman? I would be under the table in a ball if I was in love with that woman and she was dead. I would be inconsolable." They criticized Dave's lack of emotion. "You fake cried for about 6 or 8 hours today. Not one tear came out of your eyes," they told him. not one. But Selesky defended his client, pointing out that everyone reacts to stress and grief differently. It's dangerous to draw conclusions based on someone's demeanor, he warned. In a final bid to clear his name, Dave agreed to take a polygraph test, but by then it was the middle of the night, and investigators couldn't find anyone to administer the test. With no confession and no polygraph, the detectives had to let Dave go at the end of the interrogation. Though frustrated, the police knew they would have to keep digging for clues. What they uncovered next would shock them. As they investigated further, it became clear that Dave Tronis had been living a double life, or perhaps even more than two. Despite the mounting evidence, some, like Chanti's relative Cindy Da, still believed Dave was innocent. "I would bet my last dollar that it wasn't him," Cindy said. She explained that Chanti had adored Dave, and their relationship appeared mutual. "Did she ever express any concern or fear of Dave?" she was asked. "Never," Cindy replied confidently. Even after hours of questioning by detectives, Cindy remained convinced of Dave's innocence. Dave Tronis, after his wife's death, returned to his home in Delaney Park, where Cindy, a relative, found him. She immediately examined him for any signs of struggle, but found nothing. No scratches or marks. Curious, she asked him directly, "Did you have anything to do with Chanti's death?" Dave's response was resolute. "No, I would not kill the love of my life." Defense attorney Richard Selesky argued that detectives and prosecutors were biased from the beginning, convinced that Dave was the culprit. He believed this bias was clear from the police report, accusing investigators of being like a bull in a china shop in their rush to make the evidence fit their narrative. Selesky claimed they had failed to develop other suspects. However, Detective Ryan Vescio denied this, stating that detectives thoroughly investigated all possible leads. One such lead came from an unexpected source, a worker at Club Orlando, a same-sex bathhouse. The worker informed detectives that Dave was a regular patron of the club, renewing his membership every 6 months. During their investigation, detectives discovered that a club employee had witnessed Dave engaging in sexual activity there. While many who knew Chanti believed she would never have tolerated such behavior, Vescio speculated that she might have known about Dave's secret life, but kept it to herself. He wondered if Chanti had found out more on the night she was murdered and possibly threatened to cut Dave off financially, which could have been a motive. Dave, however, had his own theory. He suggested to Cindy and others that Chanti may have been killed by a burglar. He claimed that $5,000 in cash and Chanti's $155,000 diamond engagement ring were missing, raising suspicions of a robbery gone wrong. But detectives found no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle, and other valuables were left untouched. They even considered the possibility of a homeless man seen around the area, whom neighbors described as resembling actor Woody Harrelson, but that lead also went nowhere. Detectives also looked into Chanti's ex-husband Jim Cooper due to the couple's contentious divorce. However, Cooper was quickly eliminated as a suspect as he had an alibi. 4 months after Chanti's murder, on August 29, 2018, Dave Tronis was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Cindy, despite the arrest, remained skeptical. "I wasn't believing it whatsoever," she said, convinced that authorities were simply trying to close the case easily. Prosecutors gained crucial evidence with Dave's arrest: Chanti's missing engagement ring. As long as the ring remained missing, Dave could argue that a burglar had killed her. But when police searched the room at his mother's house, they found the ring in Dave's suitcase, effectively dismantling his defense. Dave's arrest wasn't the end of the investigation. It led to more startling revelations. Prosecutor Ryan Vescio and his team received a tip that took them to Minnesota, where they uncovered details about Dave's first marriage to a woman named Carol. Friends of Carol suspected that Dave might have been poisoning her, as she developed mysterious health problems soon after their wedding. This discovery made Vescio question whether Chanti might also have been poisoned. Chanti had undergone an emergency appendectomy just 8 weeks before her death, and poisoning can present symptoms similar to appendicitis. Dave had also told detectives that Chanti had digestive issues right up until the day she died. In November 2018, Vescio and Detective Teresa Sprague traveled to Minnesota to meet Carol face-to-face, hoping to uncover more about Dave's past and whether it could shed light on what really happened to Chanti. Carol, Dave Tronus's ex-wife, told prosecutor Ryan Vescio that she had long dealt with chronic pain, immune system issues, and gut problems. Dave often prepared most of their meals during their marriage, but Carol never suspected that he was responsible for her health issues. When Vescio asked if she ever considered the possibility that Dave might have been poisoning her, she firmly said no, adding that her health problems persisted even after their divorce. Despite this, Vescio remained suspicious, theorizing that Dave might have been responsible for both of their illnesses, though there was no concrete evidence to support this. Adding to the mystery, Vescio discovered that Carol and Dave still had a joint bank account, even though they had been divorced for years. This account sometimes held hundreds of thousands of dollars. Carol claimed she had simply forgotten to remove her name from the account, but Vescio found this hard to believe. He speculated that Carol, who was never charged with any crime, might be managing Dave's finances while he was in jail. Another major twist occurred when detectives placed a surveillance camera outside Dave's home shortly after Chanti's death. The camera captured private investigators hired by Dave's legal team entering and leaving the property. When one of the lawyers, Robert Mandel, realized that the surveillance footage existed, he called Vescio with unexpected news. He had been holding on to a crucial piece of evidence for 11 months, a set of bloody sheets from the garage apartment where Chanti was found dead. This revelation shocked Vescio. But that wasn't the only surprise. The next morning, Mandel called again, this time revealing that the defense also had a green cord, which had been removed from the house by a private investigator. Mandel claimed the cord had been preserved because Dave had threatened to kill himself. Vescio found this explanation suspicious, especially since the autopsy had revealed that Chanti had been strangled, making the green cord a potential murder weapon. Tests were conducted on the cord, but it did not contain any DNA. However, since the cord had been retrieved weeks after Chanti's death, authorities believed Dave had enough time to clean it. After months of investigation, Vescio developed a theory about the timing of Chanti's murder. A single earring was found on the nightstand, while the other was still in her ear, suggesting she had been preparing for bed when the attack occurred. Blood on the sheets and bed frame further supported the idea that Chanti was attacked in her bedroom, likely between midnight and 2:30 a.m. However, Dave didn't call 911 until the following afternoon, claiming he had just found Chanti's body in the bathtub. Defense attorney Richard Selesky argued that investigators were unfairly jumping to conclusions, insisting that a few hours unaccounted for didn't justify shifting the timeline. As Dave sat behind bars, the prosecution continued to build their case, seeking out anyone with information that could help explain what really happened to Chanti. In an unexpected twist, a former jailmate of Dave Tronus, Edward Gizi, came forward with startling information. Gizi, who had shared a cell with Tronus in Orlando's 3 Whiskey housing unit, claimed that he and Dave bonded over a shared interest in obscure hallucinogens, including sapo, a poison derived from a South American frog. Gizi recalled that Dave suggested one could quietly kill someone by slipping sapo into salsa. While this seemed outlandish, it resonated with investigators, since they suspected that Dave may have poisoned both of his wives. Gizi provided even more damning information, claiming that Dave had admitted to having a fight with Chanti before she died. According to Gizi, Chanti had discovered messages on an app on Dave's phone, which suggested that he was having affairs with men. Chanti allegedly threatened to expose him. Gizi said Dave confessed that he snapped and implied he had killed her, although he did not explicitly say the words, "I killed my wife." Investigators tried to corroborate Gizi's story about the app, but found no evidence of any app purchases or related data on Dave's phone. During questioning, Gizi confirmed he had heard Dave admit to killing Chanti, but this conflicted with his earlier statement, where he had only mentioned that Dave snapped. Both the prosecution and the defense agreed that Gizi's credibility was questionable. Gizi had pleaded guilty to a charge of lewd or lascivious behavior, and was now a registered sex offender on probation, casting doubt on his testimony. Richard Zaleski, who took over Dave's defense in 2020 after the original attorneys withdrew, knew that raising doubt about the credibility of such a witness would be key. However, Chanti's family had no doubts about Dave's guilt. Cindy Da, who had previously been enchanted by Dave, now decided he deserved the worst penalty. Her heart ached for Chanti, whom she remembered as a kind, fun-loving person with unmet ambitions. Cindy was adamant that Dave be found guilty and sentenced to death. She wanted him to recall every lie he told, and she wanted justice for Chanti.